Hello, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the show, Control or Be Controlled. Today's guest is Judith Germain. She's a multi-award winning leadership consultant, trainer, keynote speaker, and creator of Maverick Leadership. She helps senior leaders and organizations navigate complexity, strengthen influence, and lead effectively under pressure. She's also the creator of the Human Leadership System, author of the Maverick Paradox, host of the Maverick Paradox podcast, and editor of the Maverick Paradox magazine. Judith, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
All right, so I would also like you to introduce yourself to my audience.
Okay, hi. So I'm the creator of the Human Leadership System. I, as you said before, a podcaster. I am curious at how leaders really lead when they're under pressure. That's where my focus is right now.
All right, so I have some questions here for you, and I would like us to get into them.
Sure.
Okay, Judith, what makes Maverick Leadership the antidote to performative leadership, and why do organizations need it now more than ever?
That's a really good question. I think with performative leadership, it's all about what you're doing in terms of how it looks, not necessarily what the outcome is. And I think maverick leadership is more focused on meaningful outcomes. Maverick leaders, I define mavericks as willfully independent people. And maverick leaders, they challenge assumptions, they tell uncomfortable truths, and they make decisions based on what the situation requires rather than what is politically convenient. So most organizations don't always have a leadership problem, but they have a distorted leadership system. Mavericks tend to spot that distortion first. That's why they're the antidote for people who just want to look good.
All right, so many leaders work hard, follow best practices, and still struggle. Why do good leaders sometimes fail, even when they seem to be doing everything right?
Good leaders struggle, right? Because they could be really good in what they do, but they are working in a system that's quite distorted. So what can happen is that they're in an environment that may be toxic, is an environment where they've got issues around what I call the 5 anchors, which is authority, alignment, ownership, expectations, and capacity. And they struggle because they don't know how to read the system, how to interact with it. Because sometimes you can have leaders that are really good, but the system's distorted, or you can have a system that's distorted, system that's good, and the leaders don't have the capability. So they struggle because sometimes they think it's a capability issue rather than understanding the environment around them.
All right, that was a wonderful answer, Judith. So there's a big difference between being influential and simply being loud. How can leaders tell which one they are, and what separates real influence from noise?
When someone's loud, they're creating attention, so they're making everything come back to themselves. But real influence creates movement. So if people agree with you, so you're being loud and you're drawing people towards you, but nothing changes, there's no real sustainable outcome, then you're just creating noise rather than influence. So I define influence as calibrated motion. So influence is about traction, not about noise.
All right. So what's the number one mindset shift that helps a business owner move from constantly hustling for clients to building a business that people actually want to buy?
I think the number one shift is that you need to stop trying to convince everyone to buy from you. And it's more important to become known for solving a specific problem. Because people don't buy because they've seen you, they buy because they trust that you can solve their problem. So what we need to do is narrowcast. So you're actually having a well-defined problem that you're solving, that you can go deep and broad with it. But, if you can't stand out for what you do, so say you're a coach and you think somebody, you go, right, I'm a coach. Everybody has an opinion what a coach is. So you're fighting that opinion rather than what you uniquely bring to the table.
All right, thank you so much for that wonderful answer. So, you have done extensive work around neurodiversity and
Mm.
maverick thinkers. How can organizations create environments where these individuals can thrive instead of being forced to conform?
That's a really good question. And it's a similar when we're talking about neurodivergent and maverick thinkers, is in the sense that we need to stop trying to make everybody the same, because no organization is going to survive if everybody in it is thinking in the same way and doing the same thing. So the goal is not to become more typical. So we tend to ask maverick thinkers or the neurodivergent to be like neurotypical people or conformists. I would say organizations' goal is to understand the environment, enable them to develop influence and maintain authenticity without creating unnecessary friction, because difference isn't the problem, but the system's response to difference often is. Does that make
All right.
sense?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Thank you so much. So, you talk about leading from your core leadership identity. What does that mean? Uh, how does it change the way people experience your leadership?
That's a really good question. And I spend quite some time helping people come up with their leadership identity, because most people focus on skills, and I'm interested in what happens underneath the skills. So I see leadership identity in three key parts. The first part is about your leadership proposition. What is your proposition as a leader? What are the processes that you use? What are the stories that you tell? So, for example, uh, my process is to strategize, innovate, and execute. And I do that all the time, even when I'm not at work. That's just my process. And understanding that process makes it easier for me to influence and be more effective. And then the second stage is to look at your leadership impact. So, how are you impacting? Where does the energy lie? Are you someone who's a strategist? Are you somebody who's more of an ideas person? How does that link to the proposition? And then finally, it's your leadership talent. So what is it that's good for you? So for me, my leadership talent is seeing truth, which means for me that I'm tremendously insightful very quickly. So I can see the problem and the solution almost at the same time, which is kind of useful for a consultant to be able to do that. So I think once you understand your leadership identity, you know exactly what you bring. What is it that you can really impact on? And you are able to move people, influence them better. Because people experience clarity when the leaders stop performing leadership and start expressing it authentically. Your leadership is stronger. Make sense?
All right. So, it sounds counterintuitive, but many senior leaders feel invisible despite their position. Why does that happen, and what can they do about it?
Another good question. I think people get confused and they think visibility is the same as having leadership presence, and it's not. And being senior, all that does is give you a seat at the table, whereas influence determines whether the conversation moves. People feel senior leaders feel invisible because they don't know how to influence. I talk about influence having four key drivers: capability, decisiveness, impact, and power. And you need to be able to interlock all of those for real influence to happen. And that's what stops you from being overlooked.
So, Judy, what is one uncomfortable truth about leadership that most people avoid discussing, but every leader needs to understand?
All right. So I came up with a concept called the human leadership system, which looks at the individual and the system and how they interact together. And what's the uncomfortable truth is that the human leadership system is like a storm, and the storm is permanent. So when you interact within an organization, is that you're going to see huge tsunami waves all the time. That's its current state, right? The current state is a storm. What the role of the leader is to do is to reset and recalibrate the storm so that it's smaller waves. But you'll always be in a situation of resetting and recalibrating as a matter of course. And it's an uncomfortable truth because people feel like you do it the once and then everything's settled. But the days when we were in a stable environment are gone. Real complexity exists. And we need to recognize that as leaders, we need to constantly be recalibrating and resetting that storm rather than hoping it will have one big event and it will stop. So what will happen if you recalibrate, and that's one of the work that we do at Marriott Paradox, once you learn how to recalibrate, you're no longer looking at big tsunami waves, you're looking at much smaller waves. And that's the sort of business as usual that you want, not these huge storms that people can't deal with.
All right. So, what is the human leadership system, and why is it such an important framework for understanding leadership effectiveness?
Okay, yeah, it's a good question. I keep mentioning it without actually having to find it. So I would say it's a diagnostic model that helps leaders understand how authority, ownership, standards, alignment, and capacity interact. It helps leaders understand what is really happening under the symptoms. So one of the people that I was working with recently in an organization actually said what it helps them do is actually diagnose what's happening and reset or recalibrate in real time, which is amazing because what you're doing is that you're actually dealing with the issue as it happens. So you're learning how to respond rather than react to things as they come up.
All right. So, Judith, leadership often looks very difficult under pressure. Why does pressure change leadership behavior? And how can leaders maintain effectiveness when the stakes are high?
It's a good question because a lot of leadership development looks at leading under pressure as a welfare thing, like make people more resilient, avoid burnout, and all that's really important. But we have to recognize the important thing here is that under pressure changes how people make decisions, communicate, collaborate, trust, and exercise authority because pressure itself changes the rules of leadership. Once we understand that, we can become more effective if we're able to diagnose what that pressure is doing in real time and be able to work through that. Does that make sense?
Sure, that makes sense. Thank you very much, Judith. So, is there one question you wish people would ask you about leadership that they do not ask you?
I would say that one of the questions would be, why is it that you can't achieve what you want to achieve, and why are organizations wasting so much money? And I say that because whenever there's an issue, organizations reach to develop their leaders, which is a good thing because it's important to develop your leaders. But when they go for a generic provider, they are only actually developing responses to the symptoms, not the actual problem or the condition. and they end up wasting a lot of money because they're not actually affecting the system as well as the individual and how the individual reacts to that system. And I think that's the thing. I think everybody needs to ask is, before I spend thousands of pounds on a leadership intervention, whether that's coaching, mentoring, training, facilitation, whatever it happens to be, does that provider understand what's actually going on in terms of the system and be able to prepare their leaders so that they're more future proofed?
Thank you so much. I think you kind of answered that question perfectly well, because most people, they get thrown off balance with that question and they begin to think. Thank you so much. So, can you talk about your book,
Mm.
Maverick Paradox?
Yeah, so the book's called The Maverick Paradox: The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders. And what it does is it looks at what is a maverick. There's four types, as it were. So you've got the socialized maverick, extreme maverick, you've got conformists, and you have the maverick behaviorists. And maverick behaviorists, what they do is they behave like a maverick in some core part, like maybe work, but when they come home, they might be much more conformist. So the book looks at, how do you lead like a socialized maverick? How do you understand the power dynamic? How do you deal with the toxic extreme maverick? And then how do you lead? So people have said when they've read the book, it's like, oh, I felt seen. Or they've said, now I really understand what to do when I come along this kind of scenario. It's also been described as a blueprint for leadership.
All right. Thank you so much. So, Julie, if there's one thing you want listeners and the audience to take away from this, what would that be?
Anyone, and I mean anyone, can be developed to be an excellent leader. Everyone can be able to be a good leader in the moment. If you want to find out more about the types of things that are stopping you from being a good leader, you can do a free diagnostic from my website. Can I give the link? It's maverickparadox.co.uk/leadership-influence-diagnostic.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I was going to ask you how can my listeners connect with you as well.
You can connect with me via LinkedIn. Just find my name, Judith Germain, Germain. Follow me there, or go direct to the website, which is maverickparadox.co.uk.
All right, Judith, thank you for sharing your perspective and your insights about leadership. Thank you so much for bringing value to my audience.
You're welcome. It's been fun.
All right, thank you so much.